Hi, everyone. Welcome to Shamelessly Relevant, a podcast where we have conversations with the LGBTQ community.
We're your hosts. I'm Elena Burgé. My pronouns are she, they. I am pansexual and polyamorous.
I'm Julie Blunt. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm queer. And today we have two guests.
Hello, my name's Gavin Hudson. I am he, him, and I am a multimedia staffer at the State Hornet.
I am Kris Hall. I work as the multimedia editor here at the State Hornet, and he, him pronouns would be appropriate for me. I'm openly bisexual. I also work with KSSU. You might recognize me on the street with a giant cheese hat. I am DJ Uncle Cheese. So, love to be here today.
Cool. We're glad to have you. So, today we're going to be talking about the concept of coming out. Planned Parenthood defines coming out as the process that people who are LGBTQ go through as they work to accept their sexual orientation or gender identity and share that identity openly with other people.
So the first kind of thing we're going to talk about is the stages of coming out, because before you come out, you go through this entire process of figuring out who you are. And that could be, noticing that there's signs of maybe some sort of exploring your sexuality. What do you guys think about that?
You want to go first?
No.
All right. For me, it's I think my process has been a little different than most people because while I've already had my coming out of sorts, I'm still kind of going through figuring out who I am and trying to realize some certainties about me. And so my process of coming out was basically my mom would just notice that every now and then I would just say Leonardo DiCaprio was hot. And she would pull the Seinfeld of like, oh, it's okay if that's, your preference. And eventually it was just like, all right, yeah, he's really hot. And I think I might be into this. And so my mom was just pretty accepting of that. And she was like, yeah, I knew it. And I was like, no, you didn't. But I'm, still kind of going through and trying to figure out whether or not I really think he's that hot or if he's just like an abnormality.
Yeah, I think that's the beginning of the process where you're kind of noticing those. And that's like one of the first stages, but it's very much different for everybody who goes through it.
Mm-hmm. I don't think you're old enough for Leonardo DiCaprio.
No, I think he's right in the sweet spot.
My story was a little bit more vanilla. I feel like everyone around me kind of knew before I did. I was bullied for it a lot by someone who was excessively homophobic, and it hadn't even entered my mind yet. It wasn't until that person left my life and I found out that they were having their own shame around their own titles and their own labels, which honestly, now that they can be open about it, I'm proud of them. I'm happy that I have some light and concern to that relationship. But it was something that I was thinking about a lot because I know who I am and I'm comfortable with being who I am, but I just didn't know how to tell the people around me how I was that because I'm not so forward with it. I didn't feel like I had a right to present that way or to say that I could put this title on. But the more I talked to people privately about it, the more I realized that this is part of my identity. So I am a very open and honest person, and this was kind of the last thing that I had to open up about in order to be this open book that I aspire to be. So,
Yeah. And yeah, the next stage of coming out kind of flows into that, and that's kind of identifying a label for yourself, which is a lot more complicated than it seems because sexuality and gender identity are very fluid. So like coming down on a specific term that you want to identify with or something that really resonates with you can take a long time and it can change, but that's kind of the second step of figuring out like the coming out process for you as an individual.
Another thing that goes into that is like becoming comfortable with that identity you're figuring out. You might not even be completely comfortable with it yet. But.
Yeah, and coming out to some communities, some people that you're close with is a lot easier than others. I know in my life, coming out to my friends and even my family, I was very lucky in that regard, was pretty simple with some of my identities. Like I'm very proud and like open to admit like, oh yeah, I'm pan, like I'm attracted to everybody. But coming out as poly has been like one of the most difficult things for me just because it's not really culturally accepted in a lot of senses. And like I can't even really imagine myself coming out to my like dad anytime soon. Like I've come out to my siblings and stuff, but there are different parts of your identity that can feel like you feel that internalized stigma towards them. So it can be really hard to come out of some things, and it just is a long process in many regards.
I want to comment and say that I'm monogamous, but I was in a relationship with someone who wanted to explore this polyamorous part of themselves. And it isn't easy. You know, as someone who is monogamous, I only have one person that I have to figure out, like, can I trust this person? Can I be vulnerable with this person? And you have found that you can and want to take on the ambitious task of doing that with multiple people. So that's not easy. So.
No, it's not. We're probably going to have a full episode on polyamory. Moving away from that, there are some complications and dangers to coming out. Julie, if you want to get into that.
Yeah, so coming out is complicated in and of itself. And because gender and sexuality are so fluid, a lot of people might not accept that. If somebody was to say that they're fluid in their sexual identity or their gender identity, they might be like, well, what's your label? I don't know. You know, that's what I say a lot of the times. People are like, what's your label? I'm like, well, I'm queer because I don't exactly have a label for that. I'm still exploring it. And so that kind of is where the complications lay, is trying to explain to a heteronormative society that if you don't have a label or an exact gender identity or sexuality, you don't have to explain that to people, but they're basically wanting it.
I feel like we got into this in our last episode where we kind of talked about queer baiting and pressure to come up with a defined, like, concrete label, but it seems like almost counterintuitive to like what queerness is, because labels just make it easier for other people to digest your identity, when in reality it's a very personal process and you don't owe anybody that label from yourself.
Yeah, as somebody who's kind of struggled with figuring out their own label, I've kind of come to two realizations over time. And that's like, I don't need to give anybody a label for myself. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really affect anybody in any different way. It really doesn't affect me in any different way. And that second realization stems off of that. I really just don't care. Like, if something happens, something happens. I don't have to define it as anything. And so I've just kind of given up the process of trying to figure out the label, because why do it? If it's just going to change later, then who cares?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I don't want people to worry about identities and labels. I don't want to have to worry about it intrinsically in myself. I don't want to have to try and prove to you that I am what I say I am, and I don't want you have to worry about it. Mm-hmm. What I found is that by sharing with people that I am a bisexual man, it makes it exposes me to the misogyny of men. And I don't like being in that environment. So I personally have not had any personal experiences with another man, but that's just because I'm my heart goes out to anyone else who has the attraction to men, because men are complicated, closed off individuals, and I don't want that anymore. That's my perfect society, I guess.
For sure. I think your point kind of goes into the next thing we want to address, is that coming out can be dangerous. And it can be scary, especially because of thoughts like that, where there's so much energy surrounding like masculinity that can make coming out feel like a really uncomfortable process for a lot of people, because they feel like they may be victimized because of that by friends, family members, people in their community. And that can lead to a lot of physical dangers that I think is really important to acknowledge when we're talking about the conversation of coming out.
Yeah, and that also kind of leads into the dangers of coming out.
Yeah, we had a buddy that was just extremely homophobic, and not in like the gamer homophobia sense where you just like make jokes, but like he just couldn't stand the thought of gay people, and he blamed it on his upbringing and said that that's just how he was raised. And so anytime me and my friends would make like a gay innuendo, he would just lose his mind and just altogether leave, didn't want to be around any of it. And it got so bad to the point that we didn't hear from him for like an entire year, because we just kept making gay jokes. And like, I'm lucky that I had such a supportive friend group at the time, because my friends were just overwhelmingly supportive of me, and I would confront him on it every now and then, but me and him were always super cool. And so he never knew that I had felt the way that I did, and he still doesn't really know. And we talk to him now, but he's still in this just mind space of, I can't stand it. I don't want to talk to these people. I don't want to be around these people. Like, and it's just sad because it's like you're closing yourself off to such extraordinary things. Like, you don't get Queen without being gay. You don't get like Harry Styles without being gay. Like, it's just such an incredible part of life that you just close yourself off to just because of some rooted hatred or even some fear of yourself.
Mm-hmm. And I hate that idea that people use, like, oh, I was just raised this way. Like, that's why I think the way I do. When in reality, it seems like that's just a cop-out, dude. Like, you can change the way you think about these things. It takes active effort. You have to be willing to change. But when you retreat to your childhood or these other things that you just kind of decide to blame your actions on, like, you were taking no personal responsibility for yourself. And it is pathetic, honestly.
I had a friend like that too, where he whenever we would go party together, he would get racist and homophobic, like blatantly so, because he thought that it was ironic. He thought it was ironically funny because he wasn't actually racist or homophobic. This was the sense of mind that he had. And I would tell him, man, I was like, you can't say that. Like, you can't. And he would just get like, I know, man, I'm sorry. I'm a trash person. And I'm like, you don't have to be. Mm-hmm. We can, and it takes exposure, honestly, because people can be genuinely set in their ways. So all that you need in order to get out of that mindset is consistent, healthy exposure to our environment. And my relationship with the person has gotten better. Can I hear one of your jokes?
Oh my
Give me one
god.
of my jokes.
You said you say like gay jokes on Discord, so.
Oh yeah. Every now and then, me and my buddies would just throw fun jokes around, and even in class we'd do it. So every now and then, tell my buddy, "Hey, I'm gonna blow your back out tonight." Stuff like that.
So, kind of going into what you were talking about, having somebody who would just end up blatantly homophobic and racist, that goes into part of the dangers of coming out, is you can have homophobic community members. For me, it was when I came out, I knew that I was going to have unaccepting family members, and that is still very present to this day. But there is somebody in my family who, when they found out, they never talked to me again, and I've been trying to see them and go to their house for a vacation, and it's just no answer. And it's like, it's disappointing and it's frustrating because that's somebody that's a family member of mine, somebody I'm blood related to. But I kind of look at it as if they don't accept me for being me, then I'm just not going to give them the time of day. And the other thing is too, is like, I haven't changed. I'm still the same exact person. I knew I was queer since like 6th grade, and that I've seen them, like, I didn't come out until I was 19, I think. And so I have been the same person that they have known. But just the fact that they found out that there is that I am not completely straight, or that I don't like 100% men, that is what's frustrating to me. And it's disappointing, and it can be scary because I've seen the things they say, and it's not great. And that's a part of the dangers of coming out, because a lot of these people that do come out, especially at younger ages too, have to deal with maybe a household that is not completely accepting. And queer youth, LGBTQ youth, have such a high rate of homelessness that it's extremely dangerous. There's a lot of violence against trans Black women specifically. Being queer in a public place, there's a lot of hate against that. A lot of these LGBTQ plus clubs are getting, attacked and terrorized because it's supposed to be a private place for queer people to be themselves, and it's just not accepted. If you're walking down the street with a partner, somebody would start yelling slurs at you. It's a lot of there's a lot of dangers in being so publicly out and so publicly open. And it's just, that's also what makes it so hard to accept your sexuality and your gender identity, because if it's something that somebody doesn't agree with, you can completely lose it all.
I want to say that I was hesitant to be on this podcast because when you look at this table, we are a ragtag group of white individuals. Mm-hmm. I am a white man of privilege. I have a mildly healthy family that absolutely accepted me the moment I said anything. So I don't want to discount the person who's not in the room right now, who doesn't get to talk about the complications of being in a different culture and a different community, who struggles with things that I don't. But to switch from that tangent to another one, I was at the Pride Center earlier today, and my role as a journalist is to elevate the voices of people who aren't heard. And one of the struggles that I have been facing is I want to cover the LGBTQ community on this campus, but it is becoming harder to do, or it's not harder to do, it is hard to do because people don't feel safe to share their labels and to be open with who they really are, because there is danger out there. And I feel like I told them every time I enter the Pride Center here on campus, I feel like I'm a wolf in sheep's clothing. I say, I want to elevate your voice, but I do not want to put you in danger. And I ask, and I try and almost bargain with them and say, I want you to feel heard, but I don't want you to be in danger. So how can we try and, so right now we're trying to figure out ways to report on this feeling safe on campus. And yeah, that's one of the struggles we're facing, is I want to elevate that voice, because they've told me they don't feel safe on campus, but I can't get them on the record to say it. So
I think that's why we kind of wanted to talk about this topic in conjunction with us kind of talking about queer baiting as well, is just the fact that this issue is really complicated, not only for the person themselves trying to figure out their labels and what they want to define themselves as, if they want to define themselves, but also how much stigma and struggles there are around this issue. It can be really hard, and you have to come out to so many different communities, and putting yourself in a public platform is like one of the largest ways you can come out. You have to like have this definite identity and feel that need to like explain yourself to others, when that's not something that's really necessary in the queer community. So I understand that there's a fine line between like covering the queer community and also putting queer people in a spotlight that they might not necessarily want to be in, but it is still important to continue trying to like illuminate the voices of this community and show their stories and talk to them in a way that's comfortable for them. And I think it's very respectful to go into their space and cover them in ways that make them comfortable, when they can come to you and they can choose to share their stories, rather than forcing them into the spotlight and making them disclose anything that they're uncomfortable with disclosing.
Yeah, sometimes when I realize I have to come out to a new community, like this is my first semester at the State Hornet, and previously only a few people knew that I was queer, and it was just something where it was like I didn't explicitly tell people. I would voice those opinions. If somebody mentioned something about women, I'd be like, oh yeah, she's beautiful, you know, stuff like that. And then they kind of look at me and I was like, okay. And I'm like, well, then I would have to say, you know, yeah, I'm queer. This is how I feel. The same thing happened when I got my new job. They were talking about something and I mentioned something and they kind of looked at me like I was weird. And I go, no, I'm queer. Like I don't really have a preference and stuff like that. And I just feel like it can be very nerve-wracking. Like coming out to a whole new group after you've already done it, it could be it takes a huge mental health toll as well. And that's another danger, is having that negative side of your mind kind of saying, these people aren't going to accept me. I'm not going to be welcomed. It's a whole new person, trying to explain yourself to other people. It's LGBTQ people, the LGBTQ community has a very high rate of, a very high suicide rate as well. The fact that you think you have to do it every single time you meet somebody new or welcome yourself into a new community, there's a lot of ways that could either go right or could go wrong. And I think that's where people kind of realize the dangers to it as well, is it like I said, you could be either accepted into it or not accepted into it, and it could lead to so many other consequences. And I think that takes a huge mental health toll on queer people in general. For me, there was a certain amount of time where I was just figuring out who I was, because I was extremely, extremely depressed. It took months for me to figure out who I was and figure that out, because I knew since a very young age that I was queer, but I never expressed that. Then I get to high school and my friends are like, oh, I'm bisexual. It's like, oh, what a fun label. What does that mean? And they're like, well, it means, you know, I like men and women. was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. And then I was like kind of exploring myself. And then I get out of high school, and then I finally started exploring bisexual, and then I had other people kind of influence these things to me. But I knew from a young age that I was queer. I just did not want to accept the fact that I was, because I didn't want to have to face that homophobia that I faced before, because that broke me. I also had somebody once tell me, like, I wouldn't accept you because of my religion. And that was something else that was like, broke me, because they were one of my closest friends. And that took a huge mental health toll on me. It took me forever to figure myself out. And then finally, you know, when I was 19, I was like, hey, this is me. This is who I am. And I've come to terms with it now. And I'm super open about it. I still get very scared to talk about it. I still get very emotional talking about it. But I feel like it's something that, for me to be who I am and feel comfortable with who I am, it's something I want to face. Not that I have to, it's something that I want to face and want to talk about, because then not only do people hear my story, but I'm also able to help myself understand that. And now it doesn't affect my mental health as much, because I'm surrounded by a great community that accepts me. My close family accept me for who I am. I have a lovely younger brother who is perfectly happy with my label, and some of his friends are also queer, so he uses that as like a way to understand everybody, and it's a very great family support. I've got some very great friends that support it as well, but not everybody has that. So I realize I'm super privileged to have that, and I'm glad I do, but there's still a lot of homophobia out there.
Taking Julie's story into consideration, I think it's really important that we have this conversation about the nuances and differences in everybody's coming out process. As you can tell, we have 4 people right here who have had very different processes of realization. So I just wanted to bring us all together and have a conversation about this. As we're wrapping up, do you guys have any final thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, as Kris was talking about talking with people who have different perspectives, I was raised in the South. And my grandparents, I was pretty close to them on my dad's side. And they're not nice people. I mean, they were nice to me because I was white and straight in their minds. But just generally not very nice people, and essentially disowned my older cousin when they had found out that she was polyamorous. And once they had kind of done that with her, granted, she was kind of the failure child of the family. So I became the prodigy, and I don't really talk to them often at all, maybe twice a year. Not necessarily out of fear, but just because I intrinsically disagree with them.
Them the cousin or them the grandparents?
Them the grandparents.
Why was your cousin considered the failure? Is it because of their affiliation with polyamory?
No, it's because she was a failure.
No.
Yeah, I hope they never see this. No, she had dropped out of high school, never got her license, always worked at a restaurant that wasn't very great, and then just kind of blamed her problems on everybody else.
If you're in the service industry, then you've reached rock bottom at that point.
Slippery slope.
Yeah.
Slippery slope.
But as far as my grandparents are concerned, I'm a prodigy. I'm a star. Granted, they're correct, but they don't know everything there is to know about me, and I'm kind of comfortable keeping it that way. But it's such a huge difference coming from Texas and moving to California, because the acceptance culture is extraordinarily different. Granted, there's just as much diversity, just not as many people are open about it. And so you'll see varying colors of people. Like, Texas isn't all yeehaw. I grew up in a majority Hispanic school with a ton of black people around me, and it was awesome. Until I moved to California, and it was just Hispanic people who all thought I grew up around white people. And so everybody just judges everybody in their own ways and sees things differently than they really are. And once we start to come together and realize that none of that matters, then you can just see people for who they really are, and that's all you need at the end of the day.
I do want to say that one of the reasons I was able to this journey of coming out is because of the community that I found at the State Hornet. They're very accepting, and they're very open. So I feel like that was definitely a catalyst to my ease in being able to come out. That said, I don't have it with me, but I'm going to put my DJ Uncle Cheese hat on. On my show, I talk about nothing but, like, I want you to feel comfortable. You start from, it's almost like a social, like, Pavlov's hierarchy of needs. You need to make sure that you're okay first before you can start branching out and like reaching other people, you know? If you're okay with the way that you feel about yourself, then you don't owe anything to anybody else. So in terms of your friend who said that they wouldn't accept you because of their religion, you have to take that internally. You have to feel, how does Julie feel about this? Can I be myself around this person? If the answer is no, then you need to reconsider that friendship. So I don't know if you're still friends with that person or not, but I would definitely reconsider whether you should be friends with that person. And it's not your responsibility to get them to accept you. It's their responsibility, if they care about you enough, to keep you in their life. So that's, as far as family, that's harder to do because, you know, how often do you talk to your grandparents again?
Maybe twice a year.
Are they Astros fans?
No.
That's a coincidence, huh? But yeah, I really want people who I'm around to know that I accept them no matter what. I'm not gonna. I like the colorblind joke about like, I don't care if you're gay, straight, blue, or yellow. Like I hate that. But that's kind of how I go. Yeah, I'm an open book, and I don't care who you are. You know, you're a cool dude and deserve respect, regardless what label you go by or labels you choose not to have.
Yeah,
So.
that's basically how I look at it, because going through the process that I've had with coming out and accepting who I am, it's like I don't want anybody to ever feel uncomfortable around me. Doesn't matter what it is. Like, I want to make sure that somebody's comfortable, and that could be, you know, being a female. It's very hard to be a female sometimes, and so I want to make sure that females feel comfortable around me, and comfortable enough to make sure that if they need help, they can come to me and I will help them. Or one of the students that I peer mentor, they have expressed not feeling comfortable with their gender identity, and I've told them, I was like, I came out to them, I said, this is who I am, and they automatically clinged to me and was like, help me be comfortable, and like stuff like that. And that's what I want. Yeah, so thank you for coming on today, really much appreciate it. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to say that fostering this kind of acceptance and this kind of community is vital towards creating a place where queer people can be openly themselves, which I think is the ultimate goal. But thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thanks.
And thank you for tuning in to this episode of Shamelessly Relevant. We'll see you next week.
Go Astros.
Shut up.